Hey, welcome back to the Big Ranch Show. As always, thank you for joining me. If you could, please hit that subscribe button down below, and let's get right to it. Well, this has got to be one of the dumbest decisions to ever come out of the Trump White House at this point in time. Barring the possibility that he may fire Rob Mueller and cancel and basically quash the investigation into possible collusion and obstruction of justice against his campaign. As of right now, this is the dumbest thing I think the Trump White House has ever done. And there have been a number of things, but they are banning the use of certain words from the CDC. And it doesn't make a lot of sense. It goes all the way through Health and Human Services. According to analysts, there are certain words that were during a 90-minute briefing on Thursday, they were informed they are not allowed to use anymore at the CDC or Health and Human Services. This is coming from a Washington Post article. Now, before we get into the words, just think about it for a minute. A president is decreeing words that cannot be used. That does not sound like a president. That sounds like a tyrant. And Donald Trump, the more we go, the more and more like a tyrant Donald Trump is sounding like. And it's something I've never seen or really, I didn't even characterize, George W. Bush as a tyrant, even though I didn't like his policies and he was very much a warmonger. And I didn't care for a lot of that at all. But I still didn't see him as a tyrant. I didn't see, I look back in history, American presidents that have done some terrible things. And I don't see them as tyrants. But this here, banning the use of certain words, that's definitely the move of a tyrant, not the move of a democratically elected president. And if you ask me, this is something that really, really needs to be talked about on the mainstream media, and you're not going to hear a lot of it. I've been watching, and there's a few comments on CNN, a few comments on MSNBC, but not a whole lot on this particular topic. It's like it was just dust, swept under the rug. Like, oh, he's just banning words. That's nothing. Now let's get into the words, and then I'll give you a quote from the Health and Human Services Director, who disputes that this is actually what's going on, even though an analyst who was there at the briefing said these words have been banned from use at the CDC. On the list, according to this Washington Post article, are the words diversity, fetus, transgender, vulnerable, entitlement, science-based, and evidence-based. Now, it may strike you kind of odd that this is the Centers for Disease Control. You would expect there to be a lot of scientists in the area, in this particular, organization of the government, its agency, as it were. And you want to take out the words science-based and evidence-based. To me, that's even worse than some of the others, but we'll get to the others in a minute. But science and evidence-based being banned from usage at a place that is known for there to be scientists and doctors. What are you supposed to use to replace science-based? Are you supposed to replace it with God-based? Religion-based? And if so, which God? Which religion? And evidence-based. It's basically the same thing. If you can't say that you have based something on evidence or based something on on a scientific method, then how in the hell can you say that you have, that you have the ability to base your thoughts or your theories or your information on anything? You can't. If you don't have evidence and you don't have the science to back it up, then you don't have anything. So that is terrible. Then you've got entitlement. I'm not sure what the CDC would use the word entitlement for. I know what Congress uses it for, and they try to lie and say that your Social Security is an entitlement. And for most of you out there, Social Security is not an entitlement. You paid for that shit. It's yours. Demand it. Do not let them take that away from you. And then there's these other words like diversity. Like, I'm guessing that's because they don't want the CDC to come out and use the phrase gender diversity or whatever. Fetus. They don't want them to use the word fetus. I guess from now on, they just want them to use baby. I'm guessing. But this says, as the article goes on, as this article, a few articles have pointed out, this could hurt those people that are investigating the Zika virus and its effects on fetuses. You know? Because that is the scientific term for an unborn baby. Fetus. There again, you can't use scientific terms now. And then there's the word vulnerable. And like vulnerable. So we can't talk about, groups of people being vulnerable to, say, radiation from a nuclear power plant. Or vulnerable to secondhand smoke. Or vulnerable to, drug use. Isn't this the president that said he was going to end the opioid crisis? Well, the word vulnerable fits when it comes to trying to deal with that. Because you have a group of people that are more vulnerable to an opioid addiction than others. For example, those that go undergo surgery and require, opioids to deal with the pain. Those people are more likely than, say, me, who hasn't had a surgery. It hasn't had any, really massive amount of pain to require something so strong. But that's neither here nor there. At the end of the day, I'm sure they can find other words besides vulnerable to cover, people that are vulnerable to those kind of things. There's other words for vulnerable. Phrases you can use like more susceptible and such. And then there's transgender. The point of banning the word transgender from the CDC, yeah, that's to try and make it as if transgender people don't exist. And trust me, they exist. They're there. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole how many genders are there and all this and that. I'm not getting into that. But the fact is, transgender people do exist. There are people that do not feel like they belong in the body they're in. And that's just how they feel. There's nothing we can do or say to change that. That is what they are. So banning the word transgender, Mr. Trump, will not change the fact that transgender people exist. Okay? That would be like somebody getting up there and say, we're going to ban the word criminal. That way criminals don't exist. This is some of the dumbest stuff I've ever seen. Now, the director of the Health and Human Services, who oversees the CDC, has disputed this. Matt Lloyd says, the assertion that HHS has banned words is a complete mischaracterization of the discussions regarding the budget formulation process. HHS will continue to use the best scientific evidence available to improve the health for all Americans. HHS also strongly encourages the use of outcome and evidence data in program evaluations for budget decisions. Now, that's just really insane that you would have analysts from the CDC that would say that these words were banned, yet the director of HSS who oversees them says they're not. I'm not quite sure who's lying, but somebody is telling a blatant lie. So the question is it the analyst from the CDC? Or is it the director, Trump's director of Health and Human Services? Well, unfortunately, because of the fact that Donald Trump has spent so much time lying over the last, last year pretty much. It's hard to believe the Trump administration wouldn't have done this. It's also hard to believe that one of his people would fess up to Donald Trump doing something after it turns out that it was a bad idea, that people turned on it, that people didn't like it. And so banning these words would do nothing except harm, scientists' ability to describe things. It goes, it's insane. It goes on down here. There's a quote from somebody down here from Vice President of Public Policy and Governing Affairs for Planned Parenthood, Dana Singer. You cannot fight the Zika virus or improve woman's and fetal health if you're unable to use the word fetus. You might be able to talk about science and evidence if you research cures for infectious disease such as Ebola. You'll be able to acknowledge the humanity of transgender people in order to address healthcare needs. You cannot erase health inequalities faced by people of color simply by forbidding the use of the word vulnerable or diversity. So, Donald Trump, this is a terrible idea. This is a thing that I hope that you rescind. I don't even care if you don't even fess up to it and you just change it. And if they're lying, please, somebody else that was there at the CDC meeting, please come forward and say that whoever did this, said this, and reported this to the Washington Post, come out and admit and say that they're lying. But if not, if there's no one else that can come forward and say that they're lying, then I'm going to have to believe that Donald Trump indeed did exactly what his Health and Human Services Director is saying he didn't. So, people, this is it doesn't make any sense. I know this really sounds absolutely stupid. That seems like something a president would do. But also, you wouldn't think a president would lie about every single thing that's come across, his plate in the last year. Donald Trump has lied about everything, even when it is blatantly clear that he knows, and that everyone knows, that what he is saying is a blatant lie. It's more that stupid misdirection. They think if they lie enough, you'll believe it. And unfortunately for many people, this holds true. Many people will definitely believe every word that Donald Trump has to say. And that's really all I have for you today. It's really just a sad state of affairs when our president wants to just go on and lie and lie and lie. But apparently this is what's going on. But like I said, please, if you were there, if you know anybody that was there, or if you ever come, or whatever, please come forward and tell us that these analysts are lying. Until then, you have a great day, and I'll see you down the road.